All right, we are live. We're going to give a few seconds for everyone to join here. While everyone is joining, maybe go ahead and let us know in the chat where you're joining us from. We'd love to know. I'm here in Los Angeles, and Tim, you're in Louisiana.
I'm in Baton Rouge, Louisiana.
Okay, that's what I thought. Nice.
Very, very hot here.
Oh, I can imagine. Yeah. I know. Even in LA it gets hot, but I'm seeing the heat spikes all over, and I'm still thankful to be here.
Yeah, a lot of humidity here.
Yeah. Yeah, I
I
can
see
imagine.
Tina's from Florida. She's probably got that humidity too.
Yeah, for sure. All right. Looks like most people have joined, so we'll go ahead and get started. So welcome everyone to our newest expert advice webinar. I'm Allie Skilperort, and I know I might be a new face to some of you. I'm filling in for Gabby today, our CEO, and I am a marketing associate at CASEpeer, which is the #1 rated case management software for personal injury attorneys. This webinar is where we sit down with successful attorneys and thought leaders about their advice for building a prosperous law firm. And take a moment right now to locate the chat box on the bottom right if you haven't already. I know many of you will have some great questions for our guest. And with that, I'm excited to welcome Tim McKey, founder and CEO of Vista Consulting. And Tim co-founded Vista Consulting in 2009 with the vision of empowering the business of law for plaintiff law firms. Tim has decades of CPA experience with local, regional, and national CPA firms, and he has worked with many business owners, assisting them with defining and attaining success in their business and personal lives. And today we're speaking with Tim about something that he is definitely an expert on, which is the best practices for managing a successful plaintiff's law firm. So without further ado, welcome, Tim, and we're excited to have you.
Thank you so much, Allie. I appreciate being here, and I hope Gabby is well as well. So.
Yes. So to get us started here, I'd love for you to go ahead and just tell us a little bit about yourself and Vista, who you are, how you got started, all of that good stuff.
Sure. Thank you so much. And I'm not going to think that you called me old when you said I had decades and decades of experience. So, but I am, or at least I'm heading that direction in any event. And that's all good because the alternative is not very good. But in any event, yes, my name's Tim McKey. My dad pronounced it Mackey, so you might hear it either way. But in any event, yes, I am not a lawyer. I am a CPA. Worked with the Deloitte firm for a while out of college in the mid 80s, and then actually practiced as a traditional accountant for about 18 years, doing the things that most people think accountants do. I happen to be a tax guy, but along about 1999, 2000, had a little bit of a change of direction in my practice. I facetiously call it a breakdown at one time, but my partner said I should call it an epiphany. So what we did at that time was actually shift our practice from being traditional CPAs to actually being consulting CPAs. And the difference in that happened, we called it, we no longer just kept the score, we helped affect the score. And we started working with varieties of businesses, looking at their systems and processes in their operation, and developing what we called operational metrics to see that best practices were being followed in all areas of the business, and having some tracking mechanism for that, not just in the financial area, but in the operational areas. And we got traction with that, and so much traction, in fact, that one of the businesses that we worked with happened to be a personal injury plaintiff law firm, and they began to recognize the value of analyzing their systems and correcting them and having accountability systems behind them to see that their team followed best practices in various areas. And we're going to talk about those areas a little bit later. But that's what we do here at Vista. And to follow that thought through a little bit of how we got started was once we got traction with that PI firm, it was going so well that they needed to hire a COO in that firm. And we didn't do that. We didn't go into the firms that we consulted with, so we needed to help them hire someone, and we did. That person happened to be a guy named Chad Dudley, who is my best friend and one of my best friends, and we formed Vista together. Chad's 14 years younger than me, so he was able to take some of the things that we were actually doing manually and automate them. And he gave a talk at a seminar about how we looked at intake. And from there, someone called and said, "Hey, can you come help look at our intake?" And Chad called me and said, "Hey, let's go do this." And Vista was born. That was about around 2008 or so. And it just began with word of mouth, and Vista grew. And we now, my 98% of my days are filled with working with plaintiff law firms across the country and our thoroughbred team here at Vista. So that's kind of how Vista got started and where we are. I did buy Chad out in 2018, and that's a long and bittersweet story. He and I are still very, very good friends. It happened to be that he and his business partners, he is a lawyer. They bought an advertising agency, and there was the optics of conflict was very great. Even though there wasn't really any, we decided to make sure that those optics were not bad. So I acquired Chad's interest, and again, I still consult with him and he with me, just not formally within Vista Consulting. So that's a little bit about us. I'm in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. I have 2 children, both grown and married, both with children, and have one wife whom I love very much, and we're here. So that's a little bit about me.
Very cool. Yeah, it's amazing to hear how you guys have kind of evolved over the years as well.
Very much interesting story.
Yeah, for sure. And I know you've mentioned that Vista evaluates 10 key areas for law firms. So if you don't mind, what are those areas?
Sure. Before I actually dig into that detail, I want to just say that, as consultants, we feel it's imperative that we assess a situation before we just start saying you need to do this or need to do that. To be honest, we've learned as much from our clients over the years as we've probably taught, because we go in and we take the Hippocratic Oath, first do no harm. So we look and see what's going on within the firms, and then based on our experience with seeing lots of different firms, and our consultants, each one of them in their own right, are experts. They've worked in law firms as receptionists. We call that director of first impressions, by the way. From receptionist to legal assistant, case manager, COO in the intake department. Our team has vast experience in that area. So when we go in and we evaluate a firm, we look at 10 areas, and they're really 2 of them strategic areas, and the others are more functional areas. So I'll go through them, and as I told Allie before we started, I'm going to spend probably a good bit of time on this slide and going through what these 10 areas are and kind of what the meaning is behind it. So we generally start by talking to the owners and the management team about what their vision and direction of their firm is. Okay. And what their mindset is in regard to potential change. And we'll talk about that a little later, because we don't come with pixie dust and just say, hey, we're going to throw this on there and everything's going to be better. We've got to find out and evaluate how these areas are functioning. So we want to know right off the bat, what is the vision for the firm and who's setting that vision? In other words, and I'll boil it down a little bit into details. If we asked the owner or the management team, if we're sitting here 3 years out, what are we talking about? What has happened? Where do you feel like the holes are? What growth are you looking for? Growth in people, growth in revenue, growth in profits, and just trying to get a very clear understanding of what the firm is about. I'll tell you that sometimes people tell us, we're just not making enough money. And we have to change that mindset very quickly, because profitability is a result of something. And that's something in the case of plaintiff law firms is delivering a high quality service in an efficient and effective way. So we work in that area and it yields those profits. So, leapfrogging to, hey, I just want to make more money is generally not a good outlook to go through. So we want to talk about these things, and certainly I'm making generalizations. Every firm doesn't say that, but every firm is very different. So we need to get a very clear picture of what this particular firm wants to be when they grow up, if you will, and then basically reverse engineer that to deliver that in some time period. So having a vision for a firm is where we start. We want to know, does the firm understand that? And if the owners and management team understand it, has that vision been communicated down through the rest of the team if there is a larger team? So vision being number one. Number two, we look at what we call the infrastructure of the firm and its culture. Now, what is infrastructure? Infrastructure is simply the positions in the firm. It's not necessarily people, it's our people or positions identified. And I'll give you an example. Is there someone who runs the operation? Is there someone who runs intake? Is there someone who is the lead paralegal in case management? Do we have an HR and training department? How do we address the client's experience as they visit our firm? So again, I'm not saying that every one of those positions that I just talked about, and there are more obviously, needs to be an individual person, but we want to make sure that the firm has identified that these spots are talked about and we need them in the firm. Now, there may be someone who wears 2 or 3 hats in those different positions, but we've talked about the positions and we come to an agreement with the firm owner and management that these are the positions, these are the functions that we need to be watching as our firm grows and as cases work their way or matriculate through the firm. So those are kind of, and the other thing about it is the firm culture. Lots of firms have different types of culture. There is, hey, we come to work, we shut our doors, we go to work. And there's firms that have the work hard, play hard. There's firms who have breaks in the day. They have morning huddles where there's some levity that goes on. And I'm not saying that any one culture is necessarily better than the other, but what I'm saying is that the firm culture should be arrived at by intentionality and not by default. Anytime that we have systems or processes that evolve by default, they're usually not as efficient, as effective, as well thought out intentional plans. The same goes with culture. I use the analogy sometimes that if whether we want to believe this or not, if we walked into each other's homes or houses, they each have a particular smell. Okay. Now you think about that and say, okay, do we want that smell to be by default or by intention? Okay. We've probably all been to hotels where they have their signature scent. That to me is a place that is thinking about intention, about their environment. And it's just like that with culture. You're going to have a culture. We've had some firms say, we don't even have a culture. Well, you have one, but it's by default. And I think it's very important to discuss with owners and managers what type culture that they want. And most of the time, culture resembles an owner or the leader's personality. And if we've got someone with a sucky personality, sometimes their culture is sucky. And we need to actually think about, okay, we don't want that. And it's okay that, we're not all the same and we're not all bubbly and we're not all this. That's perfectly fine. But defining what culture you want within the firm is very, very important. So those are the two, what I consider kind of strategic areas, the vision area, and then the infrastructure culture. And then we run through and evaluate firms in what we call the functional areas. And I'll try to tick through those pretty fast. There's the intake department or the intake system. Maybe it's not even a department. Maybe it's just a system. Maybe the attorneys of the firm are handling intake, or the paralegals are handling intake, Or you may have an intake department. If we had our druthers, we would want an intake department. Generally, we don't want attorneys or paralegals who are handling caseloads to do that, to perform that function. And there's a very particular reason for that. And it has to do with either overt or covert thinking. Overt thinking would be, hey, I'm talking to this person about this case. It sounds kind of difficult, but it's a pretty good case. But my caseload is already full. If I accept this case, I'm throwing another log on the wagon that may break my wagon. Because they're kind of litigating that case as they go through intake. We generally like an intake person handling this, who it is their job to of course, make sure the case meets the firm's criteria and that we want it, but then to sign it up, to not think about those things about the proofs that need to come into play. That is the attorneys and paralegals' jobs. But when you throw this other job on top of it of intake, it can sometimes send mixed signals and you get crossways there. So we evaluate how the intake is done in the firm and help them get to best practices on that way. The next one is simply case management. How does the case go from the intake department where it's signed up into case management, where we start working the file, if you will, to use the lingo. What is the most efficient and best way to work files? We have some firms that we've seen that have what we call pod systems, where you have an attorney, a paralegal, and a legal assistant, and they all work together all the time. We've seen configurations where attorneys work with multiple paralegals, multiple legal assistants. There are best practices in both of those areas, but we want to understand what the firm is doing and to kind of de-bottleneck, if you will, where cases are getting stuck. Generally, we like to see more a pod system, all things being equal, simply because teams work better as teams. And when you're mixing teams, if you will, sometimes the priorities can get screwed up. I'm getting direction from 2 or 3 people. What is my priority? What should I do? So there can be some confusion. But we've also seen areas where that works well, where there is a system that can go through. So what I'm saying is we assess the situation, then apply our knowledge and expertise into making those systems as efficient and effective as they can be. And you may notice too, I generally don't say efficient without saying the word effective, because being fast for just being for fast sake is not necessarily good. There are some cases that within case management that we need to actually slow down. We need to evaluate the situation. We need to, hey, you're still having some radicular pain. You're having some tingling. Have you considered getting an MRI? Discussing with your treatment people that you should get an MRI. Those kind of things are important. It slows the case down, but it adds value. And that's what we're about, is helping get more cases and add value to the cases that you have. So again, going into the functional areas, intake, case management. Then we also evaluate their human resources department. How, if someone has a conflict, if someone is not functioning well within the firm for whatever reason, what's the protocol within the firm? How do they report that to their supervisor, or is there a human resource person? It depends on the size of the firm. We actually believe at Vista that the cutoff is around 35 team members. And what I mean by that, the cutoff is you can handle without a human resource professional probably up to about 35 team members. Over and above that, we feel pretty strongly that you need to have an HR person within your firm. And again, there's two parts of HR. There's the technical part where, hey, we got to track vacation. We got to make sure that our retirement plans are working well. We've got to look at insurances. But then there's the soft part, if you will, where, hey, Billy doesn't like to sit next to Sally anymore. Those kind of things need to have a protocol that a team member knows who to go to and where to go. And if we don't take the time to identify those things, it can cause lots of confusion within firms and disarray. So Again, another functional area, human resources and training. Then there's the accounting area, the financial area. Are you getting good reports? Are you getting good financial reports on a consistent basis? Do you have a feeling that those reports are accurate? Being an accountant myself, I can criticize, if you will, accountants in general. We generally are very, very detailed. We like to see things in lots of different boxes so we can analyze it. But sometimes law firm owners and management are not that detailed in this area. So we like to see financial information that is condensed in a manner that management and ownership can understand them in a simple way. Not just give them this 30-page financial statement and say good luck with that. It's what data do the owners really want to see, and if they don't know, Vista helps them say, hey, these are the things that we think you want to see, and here's why. We don't come in with that. We don't come with a cookie cutter to anything. We want to understand what that firm's doing, and then define their systems to deliver to them the information they need from which to make well-informed business decisions. And the accounting area and the reporting in that area is extremely important. We have some schedules that we like to use, and I'll go ahead and say here, if you guys that are attendees want to see some of those schedules, I'll be happy to send them to you. Just send me an email. My contact information will be at the end. But we like to see a condensed financial statement. We like to see a profit center analysis. And again, those are just schedules that I'll be happy to send to you if you would like. But accounting obviously is an area. Then client relations. Client relations, I think, is very, very important. And the reason why is that most of your clients, I believe, don't have the technical ability to know if you're being a good lawyer or not. They probably don't even know the definition of a deposition. And that's all okay, right? But being a good lawyer, I believe, is now a table stake to get in the game. Okay, that your clients are going to judge you on other things. They're going to judge you on whether or not you return their phone calls timely. They're going to judge you on if they come to your office that the coffee's good. They're going to judge you on on the cleanliness of your office. Is your office is it very cluttered? If it is, my experience is that client is going to say, hey, I'm just one of those files. And, we really need to make a very good impression through the client experience cycle. And these are thought out systems, okay, to make sure that they have a good experience coming through the firm. We cannot, in lots of instances, predict the outcome of a case. Now, we hope that most of them are favorable, and that's great. But what we do have ultimate control over is that client experience. Okay, whether they get a good outcome is one thing, but we can control what their experience is toward an outcome. There are cases where the outcome is not as favorable as some would like, but the experience was so good, there's still going to be a referral source to you. And that's why we like that client experience cycle to be top of mind, where we are making sure that the experience is good, and we actually have a system of asking them to refer. We also want to ask them to give us a Google review or a Yelp review or whatever it is that can help us continue to market. At Vista, we don't consider ourselves marketing experts. In other words, we're not going to say, hey, you need to have billboards or go on TV, or your SEO needs to do, your search engine optimization needs to do this. But an operational area that is marketing is the client experience cycle, and how you reach back to them is a system. I have a good friend that's also a consultant and works at an advertising agency, says that in her mind, there needs to be 7 touches to clients who have come through your firm a year in different ways. And I think that's a pretty good rule of thumb. Whether it's a text or an email, maybe snail mail, or whatever, touching them and reminding them that you're here for them and their acquaintances, their relatives, their friends who have an issue. So highly important, in my opinion, regarding marketing. But I hope you can see that that's truly an operational area, not just marketing. So that's another one that we look at. Reporting, CASEpeer. What is CASEpeer about? It's about gathering data and being a repository for information about every case, and then being able to look at, I'll say in a global or in a macro area, at what's going on in every case. What status are these cases in? Those are operational metrics, and I'm not going to go too deep on those. I'll give you some in intake. We like to know how many leads a firm gets, how many of those meet the firm criteria, and then how many of them do we actually sign up as clients. And those ratios of leads to we call them wants, or meet the criteria, to actually getting them signed up and being a client of the firm. Those ratios are very important. We have some kind of rules of thumb at Vista that we like to see with those ratios. But in every area, we have metrics and what we call KPIs, or key performance indicators. And that's what CASEpeer does. CASEpeer, along with your accounting system, helps you gather that data. And then that data needs to be refined into information. And then that information can be used in making business decisions. So there's a process in getting the information, analyzing it, and then doing something with it. So again, reporting is extremely important. We also, this was much more prevalent or relevant, if you will, pre-COVID, but what's your physical plant look like? We don't have as many clients now coming to our offices, but some still do. Do we have good signage? And we can go into a lot of different areas. Some of our clients are in high-rise buildings. Some have standalone buildings. Some are now working mostly remotely. But what is your physical plant like? And is it ergonomically pleasing to your team? If you've got chairs with springs sticking people where springs shouldn't stick people, then there's a problem with these things. Looking at what can make your firm more efficient and effective, again, very important. So your physical plant, the optics of that, and then the ergonomics for your team are important. And we do also a high level look at information technology, or IT. Mostly we're just simply looking at backup and firewalls for hacking purposes and that kind of thing. We don't go really deep on that, but we do want to ask those questions. There's been a lot of spyware. Some of our clients have had ransomware problems, and even the best firewalls are not going to prevent 100% of these things. But doing what we can and making sure that you are protecting client data, the firm's data, and it's not easily to be hacked is extremely important. So, I went through those 10 areas fairly quickly, but those are the things that we feel is important to assess at firms and see if those areas are working efficiently and effectively, and if not, what are the bottlenecks and what can we do to correct that, to actually improve it. So anyway, that's the 10 areas, Allie. I knew it was going to take me a little while to get through that, but hopefully that made some sense.
Yeah, no, that was great stuff. And I really like that point you made about culture being either by default or intention, because I'd never really thought about that before, but it's so true that it's impossible to not have a culture. It's just whether you intended for that to be your culture.
Just like the smell in our house. It's there, whether we want to say it's there or not. And to make it intentional and have we've done exercises with teams, and I'm sorry to go off on a tangent on that, but it's important that, what kind of culture do we want to have, and working with your team to define that. And I'm telling you, when you start those type conversations with your team members, the whole experience becomes positive because you're trying to define it together. We use the word team. We don't use staff at Vista. We believe words mean things. So, just that is part of culture. At Vista, we have what we kind of call it our own language. We have, and that's what culture is about. It's not just about, having Twinkies in the break room or whatever it is. It's about the language you use. It's about, are we a tribe? Do we see things the same way? And the more intentional, I believe, the better it will be. So,
yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. And I'm going to borrow that smell scenario as well in the future.
You go right ahead.
Okay, awesome. And then I can imagine with evaluating these different areas that there might be trends in certain areas that you might see more deficiencies than others. So which areas do you tend to see those biggest deficiencies in?
Yeah, I want to talk about the one at the very beginning that I talked about before. And I don't know if it's the biggest area, but just a mindset of firm leadership, that entering into any type of improvement process is, we want to do it. I used the term pixie dust earlier. There is no pixie dust. Making change is an intentional effort also. And improvements don't just happen. If you want to hit a baseball very good, you've got to practice. And, that's not any different from these business areas. It's, and practice is work. So, going into a firm and understanding that the leadership of that firm is totally bought into, hey, we may be doing very good, but we can be better. That's a deficiency that we sometimes see. I often say that, our best clients are the ones that are probably functioning at the highest level, but they're always looking for that next little tidbit. I call it the crouton in the chopped salad. They're looking for that good bite. What is that next little area that's going to help us? And so I don't say that's the biggest deficiency, but it's one that we look at a lot. And the other two, I would say, are generally how firms handle their intake, because it's really easy to say, I'm going to throw more money at marketing because I need more cases. But if you throw more money at marketing and your intake system is fumbling the lead, you're it's like turning the water on in the tub and not putting the plug in. It's just kind of going through. So intake is an important one. Case management is very important. One of the big things that we see a lot, and that's a deficiency in case management, is the definition of client contact. In other words, how are we as a team going to proactively contact our clients? We believe that that's huge. When should that happen? How often? And what's the accountability system? So those two are probably the biggest. And by the way, there's really, I say there's 4 ways to grow a law firm, and there's get more cases, increase the value of the cases, and the next 2 are really subsets. Those are the main 2: get more cases and increase the value. But assuring that your clients refer to you, that goes back a little bit to the client experience cycle, but also that's get more cases, right? And then evaluating the systems and processes to make sure that they're as efficient and effective as they can be. So if you notice, the places we have the biggest deficiencies were intake and case management. That's getting more cases, that's the intake, and increasing the case value, that's case management, having a good system. And we don't get involved with case strategies and all that, but we do get involved with what questions should be asked and when should they be asked. And then what the attorney does, that's the lawyering part of it. But but getting to the end of a case and not asking the client, how do you really feel? And I'm going to go out on a limb here. I would say that's malpractice. And I'll say, because we're not just, you guys are not just attorneys, you're counselors, and your clients are depending on you to counsel them. And if they're still having issues, and for whatever reason they've been in the system a while, we need to really work with that client to get them the best outcome. And if that means more treatment, if that means digging deeper and working harder, getting another expert or something along those lines, that increases case value. And we believe that's imperative with the law firms. So,
yeah, Some really good points, and I'm loving your metaphors, by the way.
I'm from the South, so we always have a story, and I always talk too long. So
I love it. Okay, so you kind of touched on this a little bit, but in your opinion, are there any areas to you that might be more important than others that you evaluate?
I think this is an area where I'll talk a little bit about the phases that a firm can be in. I mean, what's important to a firm, and they're all different. We, like I said before, we don't come with a cookie cutter. Our work is extremely custom based on the firm that we're working with at the time. But there are, I'll say, known phases of law firms. You're a startup, obviously that self-defines. You're just getting started, and at that point, marketing and getting cases is probably the most important, and how your intake is working. But some firms are in a turnaround stage. Where they've got some issues that have been identified that we're trying to correct. So startup, turnaround, and then realignment, that, hey, maybe your leadership, your meeting structure can be off. There's the communication can be off, trying to realign. And then there's the sustaining success firms. And that was what I was referred to just a second ago, that some of our best clients, and it's really counterintuitive, are the firms that are doing really, really well. They are sustaining success for a reason, and their situations are usually a little different in that they're attacking one area that they feel like is deficient, and they've identified it. And when we go into startup firms, then it's maybe not pleasant to say, but they're startups, so every area needs work, right? We need to define the system before we can improve the system. So it depends on what I say, the maturity level of the firm, and what position, what phase they are in, to define what's important. So I might have dodged that question a little bit, but it's important that we look at it that way, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And I know accountability is often a big topic within law firms. So how would a law firm create accountability to adhere to these best practices that you've been talking about?
Well, you use CASEpeer. You use CASEpeer. You use a case management system, and you have clearly defined what needs to go into CASEpeer. We have a saying at Vista that if it doesn't go into your case management system, it didn't happen. Okay,
we say that
too. And when you have your team understand that, then you're able to get better information out, and to understand where there may be holes in your practice. So when you create accountability, there's generally reports that come out. And I'll give an example. And the one in case management was client contact. And let's just say that a firm says that we want to contact our treating clients and I'm picking a number out of the air, every 21 days. Okay, so you define whose responsibility that is, and how that's going to be reported in your case management system. And then you can get a report that, hey, Billy and Susie are say they're paralegals or legal assistants, and Billy is at 85% of every one of his clients. He has talked to them in the last 21 days. But we got Susie, who's at 98%. Okay, she's talking to her clients every 21 days. Then there's obviously some coaching that needs to be done with Billy in this case. What's going on? What's Susie doing that Billy's not doing? How is she able to make this happen when he is not? And again, those reports help us hold people accountable. I firmly believe that most people want to do good jobs. They're not lazy, but sometimes their systems slow them down. And again, that's part of our job, is to help identify which systems are being inefficient and ineffective. Even though you have a good case management system, who is reading those reports out of the case management system, and how are they then coaching? We're firm believers. You don't use reports as a hammer. You use them as coaching tools. What's going on? You love this analogy. If somebody told me that I had to dunk a basketball, and yet they didn't, give me a trampoline and some training, I'll never be able to dunk that basketball. Somebody needs to coach me, right? So holding people accountable, we first have to make sure that we've done our jobs. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that you brought up the client communication as well, because when I was on the client success team at CASEpeer, one feature that I loved talking about was how in our reports, a lot of the reports you can filter by the last, what we call client touch date. And so you can go in and filter it and see what client hasn't had the most recent, communication, and sort by worker and all of that. So that also, really helps with the accountability aspect that you were
No,
talking
absolutely, Allie. And we believe that the team member themselves, not just the management, should be able to see that data. We want transparency of data because they have then their own scoreboard. They know, what should be done based on these statistics. And sometimes, if we're not tracking these things or whatever, we're assuming that our team member knows what to do. They, I always, when a client tells me, well, they should know, my immediate response is don't should on yourself. Should do it, but if we haven't got a system that reminds them, then that's a deficiency in management, not their deficiency. So we've got to get to those things.
Yeah, absolutely. And so obviously sometimes change is hard. It's not always easy for everyone. I know I personally am pretty hesitant at first to change things in my routine. So what would you say to law firm managers when they have employees that might be resistant to change? What kind of advice would you give them?
I would say that most of us are like Allie, that we're all resistant to change in some way. I can, intellectually say that I like change and all those things, but don't change anything that I already like, then I'll get upset. So, we all have this aversion to change. But I think, by having an open mind and explaining to team members that we are going to try this, we're going to work at this. And there's something that we call the dip at Vista. It comes from a book by Seth Godin that just says, whenever you start an improvement process of any type, we'd like to think that the curve would be effort and result would be like a 45-degree angle up. Well, that's not usually how it goes. It usually goes down before it goes up because it takes a lot of input to get the change started. And if we can realize that change is hard because we're making that investment to get to something that's better, and your team can understand, you can explain that, and you can show them objective data, and also the why behind things. Why are we going to change the way we're doing it? And also, you better have a darn good reason why. Change for change's sake is not something anybody wants, but change for improvement is what we're looking for. There's lots of sayings out there, some of which or at least I'll tell you one more story. I mean, Charles Darwin, we all think, most people think of Darwin as his theory of survival of the fittest. That really is not what Darwin said. What he said was that the species that survive is the one that's most adaptable to change. So look, our industry is changing. The way that clients are looking at law firms, they're not comparing your law firm to the next law firm. They're comparing you to Apple and Zappos and Disney. They want customer service, the things that they can do. They can evaluate because they can't evaluate. They don't have the expertise to know if you're a good lawyer, but they can judge all these other things. So making changes and understanding the why behind them, I think, gives us a real leg up as leaders and management in explaining to the team. So probably went too long on that one, but that's what I believe.
Yeah, no, really good information. And
can you go back? I got one thing I want to say that I think will bring this home too. With our clients, in most situations, we ask them to annually do what we call a performance attitude analysis of each of their team members. What's their attitude like versus their performance? And if you've got a high performer with a great attitude, then we want to encourage that to the nth degree. If we have a high performer with a crappy attitude, we really need to take a look at that that person, attempt to coach them out of that, because we've been in firms where, hey, this attorney is really, really good, and everybody in the office and half the people on the street hate their guts. They're just not doing well. We really need to look at those things and decide how we want our firm to be, because that person is affecting culture. And I used an example of an attorney. It could be a paralegal. It could be someone in the mail. It could be anyone. But actually taking the time annually to look at each individual in the firm and say, what's their attitude like and how they're performing. Now, if they've got a great attitude but their performance sucks, then we've got some work to do. Okay, we've got to get that performance up, and we've got to make sure they understand what the expectations are. And we're gonna talk about that in a minute. But that little exercise of once a year, really getting Susie's picture or Billy's picture in your head and say, where are they on this spectrum? It's a great exercise.
Yeah, and I love that you mentioned culture as well, because when you started talking about attitude, the first thing that came to my mind was how it's doesn't just affect you personally, but it obviously affects everyone around you as well.
The team. It affects the entire team.
Yeah, absolutely. So, not to say you're old, but you've been in the business for some time. So
I can take it, Allie.
What are some of the business mistakes that you've seen some firms make?
Oh, let's see. Trying to do everything yourself is one. As I mentioned, I'm from the South. I'm from very rural South Mississippi. My dad ran a grocery store, and my dad did everything. So I grew up thinking that I had to do everything, no matter what business I was in. And he was able to do it because he had one grocery store and it was fairly small. But to scale, to grow a business to where you're not going to know every case as an owner or a leader, you're not going to know the intimate details, coming to that conclusion sooner than later and developing systems to manage that is extremely important. And I'll give the attendees a tip on a book. There's a book out there, the title of which is The E-Myth Revisited. It's by a guy named Michael Gerber, and E stands for entrepreneurial. The E-Myth, and the myth about being an entrepreneur is you have to do everything. You really don't. This book talks about how to identify different visionaries and integrators and people who do different things, and coming to the conclusion that is something that you should do to be able to grow. You can't do everything. I mean, you'll kill yourself. So as the firm grows, you've got to look at that. Another thing that I'll say that some businesses or I'll say law firms in this case don't do is they don't take advice from their peers. There are many groups across the country that meet consistently to talk about what they have tried that worked well and what they've tried that didn't work. And I believe there's two ways to gain knowledge. One is to get your nose bloodied, and the other one is to talk to someone who has. So, and the second one is much more pleasant. To get advice from groups and other people that have possibly more experience than you is very important, in my opinion, to listen to that advice. So if you're not listening to advice of someone who has had their nose bloodied, then more than likely you're going to get your nose bloodied, and it's not going to be very, very pleasant. So,
absolutely. And this next question is a question that Gabby had added in, and I have no idea what it is, so I'm excited to hear you talk about it. So TTE, what is that, if you don't mind telling
TTE, that's, within Vista, we talk, you remember, I said we have our own words and our own lingo and all those kind of things. And, it's part of our culture and our tribe. But TTE simply stands for tools, training, and expectations. And what we mean by that is we think that TTE is a responsibility of management, that it's your job as managers and leaders to give your team members the tools to do their job, the training to do their job. And this is the one we miss a lot. Clearly explain what is expected of them. And if you've got a team member that's not performing where you think they should, then I think the first question is not going to them and watching even what they're doing. it's asking yourselves, have we given that team member the tools to do their job? Have we given them the training to do their job, training on those tools or training on whatever system? And then have we clearly explained the expectations from us of that team member? We at Vista, we like, obviously we like job descriptions for different areas, but we take it a step further. We also like scorecards. And what I mean by that is, the job description can tell you what's expected theoretically. The scorecard can give you objective measurements. And thinking through as managers and leaders of what do we truly expect of each team member, I think if we're not doing that, then we're missing a big part of management and leadership. Because if your team doesn't know what the scoreboard looks like, how can we expect them to reach it, to score? So one of our consultants said she was eventually going to get TT&E tattooed on her arm because we mention it so much. And it's so much a part of our culture that, if something's not going right, even within Vista, we ask ourselves, do we have the tools? Have we been trained? Does everybody know what the expectations are? And when you go through that little exercise with a group of people who trust each other, I can tell you it's extremely powerful. And we know we're aiming at the same goal. It goes all the way back to the very first thing I talked about is the vision, having that crystal clear vision, and that these expectations was just a step toward it. So I hope you can see it kind of builds on itself as we go through.
Yeah. And I love that you have like your own little lingo as well. I love when, companies have their own specific words and values that, kind of what you're saying about expectations, sets expectations for your company as well of what they want to kind of live up to as well. So
yeah, I'll give you one that you'll really like. If you ever hear somebody from Vista tell another Vista person happy birthday, it really doesn't mean happy birthday. It means two other words, and I'll let you figure out what those are.
Okay, I'll be thinking about this all day now. I'll be
Call me
emailing
afterwards,
you.
and I'll clue you in.
All right. So
it's all said in love and respect.
Okay. Yeah. So you're a business owner. So how has your own experience impacted the guidance that you give law firms?
I am older. I'm 62, and have seen a lot. Have made a lot of mistakes, and trying to convince law firm owners once we do our assessment, because that assessment is inherently critical. We're going to tell them, hey, you're doing great in these areas, but just like any human, we hear the negative 10 times louder than we hear the positive. Is to not take it that you suck, that this whole thing is not worth it. It's to say, look, we've identified areas that we can improve, and we're systematically going to go after that improvement. It's easy for business owners, and myself being one, to get down about things. And you think, hey, well, you're the leader of this thing. You ought to be in great. I can say, it was a lot less stressful when I worked for someone else. I've got responsibility now for, in our case, 15 people and 15 families. And, if I get something really wrong, it's not just me, it's them. And I think sometimes as team members, we don't really understand that. And we can look at a leader and say, oh, they've got it made, they're propping their feet up, et cetera. I think it's the exact opposite. So being able to attempt to instill an ownership mentality into the team members, that they own this position, they own these things, it is, again, very important. And I think to realize that there is a dip, no matter how good something is going, we can always improve. And when you change something and are trying to improve, it's going to get a little worse before better. And just realizing sometimes that we're in the dip, we're going to get there. I'll give you one other, something that truly happened. And my partner, Chad Dudley, and I, in the very beginning, not in the very beginning, but probably a couple of 2 or 3 years into Vista, we made a change in his law firm. And it had to do with setting up a committee to look at the bigger cases and why that was important and all that. And all of a sudden their cash flow was not nearly as good as it was. And Chad called me and he said, Tim, I think we broke something. And I said, no, I don't know if we broke anything. I think we're just in the dip, because what we had done, we had slowed down some cases that probably would have gotten to the finish line. But the value, we thought we could improve the value of those cases by looking at them a little bit differently and having some more experienced more experienced attorneys looking at some of those cases. And it turned out to be right. We ultimately caught up, but it did cause a dip. And in this case, it was a financial dip, and it was pretty serious. But once we recognized that, hey, I think we're just in the dip, it made us kind of grit our teeth and say, okay, we're going to live through this, and it's going to be better when we come out the other side. And in that particular case, it happened. It doesn't always happen, but realizing that you may be there is a big part of it. So
yeah,
that's some of the things that I've learned.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. And I think being able to build and grow on your challenges and your mistakes is huge. And I'm definitely a firm believer that no matter how experienced you are or how long you've been in a certain business, that there should always be a little bit of room for trial and error, because otherwise, how are you going to continue to improve and grow? So yeah, 100%.
No, that's, I wish I could tell you I knew it all. I don't. I'm still learning. I'm still stepping in stuff every day. But, I'm trying to, just like with the law firms, when you're, I'm an old football player, and my coach told me one time, if you do things full speed, no matter if it's not perfect, it'll probably be okay. And I think that's the way it is with this. If you're looking to grow and looking to make things better, then do it at full speed. I'm not saying willy-nilly and take wild risks or anything like that, but understand that it's not going to be a straight line. It's going to be some setbacks and that kind of thing. So
yeah, absolutely. And it looks like we're making perfect time here. We're coming up on the half hour. So what is one final piece of advice that you'd like to leave our audience with?
Okay, I'm going to tell a story.
Okay. I love that.
There were two guys sitting on a porch, rural, again, South Mississippi, sitting on a porch in rocking chairs. And one is visiting, his friend, the home is one of the guys. And the friend that's visiting says, is that your dog laying there? And the guy said, yeah. He said, well, why is he whining and moaning like that? And the guy who owns the dog in the house said, well, I think he's laying on a nail. And the visitor says, well, why doesn't he move? And the owner says, well, I think he's just uncomfortable enough to whine and moan. He's not uncomfortable enough yet to do anything about it. So the point of that is, do something. Decide that you want to improve. If you find yourself whining and moaning or bitching and complaining or whatever the term you want to use about something not going right, or worse, about some team members who are not performing, then do something about it. Just talking about it certainly is not going to change it. Decide what can happen, what should happen, get some advice if need be or whatever. Then that's the way I think it should go. So the last piece of advice is be proactive. That's the point of that story, is be proactive.
Yeah. Proactive and not complacent. I love it.
That's right. Right.
Awesome. So I was having a look at the chat, and it looks like someone asked, is Vista having a conference this year? And if so, where?
Yes, Vista is having a conference in, it's actually what we call our schools. We do a full day on intake and a full day on case management systems and processes, and that's going to be in Las Vegas in November. And if you email me, I'll make sure you get the dates. I'm not going to get the dates right, and my marketing people are out there fussing at me right now because I don't have the dates in my head. But we're also going to have 2 full days on leadership and culture. It's Tuesday, Wednesday on intake case management, Thursday, Friday on leadership and culture. It is going to be a killer. We're excited about it. Those 2 days, we're getting some some speakers to come in, and Vista is going to be a huge part of all of this. The first 2 days is all Vista, all systems processes. The second 2 days is going to be leadership and culture, and the things that are a little bit more, I'll say, intangible, but extremely important. You know, it talks about mindset and those things, goes back to vision and all that. But yeah, so Las Vegas in November. And again, whoever asked that, if you will email me, I'll make sure you're on our list and get information about those schools and the conference. So, and there's my information.
Awesome. Yeah, I'll leave Tim's info up here so that anyone that would like to email him can. And looks like that was our only question. If anyone has any last minute questions, you can go ahead and chat those in. But if not, Tim's info is up there. And we really appreciate you all joining us today. And Tim, it's been a pleasure speaking with you.
No, thank you. And guys, please don't hesitate to email me, and I'll get you some information and more propaganda.
Awesome. Yeah. Thank you, Tim. And thank you everyone for attending. I'll leave Tim's info up there for a little bit. But we look forward to seeing you all next time, and have a wonderful day.
Thanks, Allie.
All right. Bye, Tim.